All right, guys, what's going on? So first things first, if I sound a little nasally, I apologize. It's starting to get warmer in the Chicago area, and once it gets warmer, my allergies and sinuses, they get all fucked up, and I feel like complete shit. So I'm kind of just coming off of a sinus infection at the moment, so bear with me if I sound nasally. Anyways, today we're going to be talking about deloads and what a deload phase is in training specifically. More so, we're going to talk into what is a deload, why do we deload, how do we go about implementing a deload, when should I deload, who needs a deload. We're going to kind of cover everything that we need to know about a deload phase in training, so stay tuned. All right, so first things first, what is a deload phase? A deload phase is exactly what it sounds like. It is a period of time where we are going to deload our training work, the amount of total work that we're doing within our training cycle. So that can be done by reducing volume, it can be done by reducing intensity, it can be done by decreasing load, weight on the bar, but it's usually with a combination of all three of those things, or a mixture of some sort of the three. The goal of a deload phase is to reduce fatigue that we've experienced through a very intense training block, and it is also used as I use a metaphor where we're taking one step backwards so that we can take two steps forward. It is a tool that we use to help recover from a very intense block that will also propel us forward into further progress in the future so we can continue to make progress in the gym and in our physiques. It's also used as a period of time where we're going to mentally and physically prepare for the next training cycle that's coming up. And in that case, I know a lot of people who refer to the deload phase as actually a reload phase. That way, reload kind of sounds a bit easier on the mind, whereas a deload kind of sounds like I'm not doing shit for a week, whereas a reload kind of gives the impression that we're taking some time off so that we can kind of get our wits together so that we can propel forward for future progress. So if I refer to this phase as a reload phase, just know that I'm talking about the same thing as a traditional deload. So if you've never heard of a deload phase before, you're probably asking yourself, Caidin, why would we ever take some time backwards? Well, shouldn't we always be pushing forward and trying to progress week after week, month after month, year after year in the gym? And yeah, that makes a lot of sense if it were physiologically possible. It's really important to understand that as human beings, we're not machines. We cannot progress session to session, week to week, month to month, year to year. Otherwise, we would be, within 2 to 3 years of training, we would all be deadlifting, benching, and squatting 600 to 800 pounds if we could linearly progress like that. Unfortunately, our body does not allow us to do that, and we have specific genetic limitations as human beings. I like to think of training as a constant give and take relationship. If we're going to enter a period of training in which we give extra effort through increasing our volume, increasing our intensity, increasing our frequency, increasing our training loads, or a combination of all of those things, at some point along the line, we are going to have to take some energy away from another training phase so that we can kind of break even on our recovery capabilities. As soon as we enter a training phase in which we start increasing volume, load, intensity, frequency, all of those things, our recovery capabilities severely diminish. And it's important to understand the basic concept that we do not grow from lifting weights, we grow from recovering from lifting weights. So anything that's going to impede that recovery ability is therefore going to impair our ability to build muscle and progress in the gym. By taking some time off, we kind of allow our body to supercompensate, which allows us to, in this case, supercompensation means that we're going to recover from that period in which we overreached, and it's going to allow us to propel forward in terms of gym progress. I like to use an analogy where if I were to take a knife, say this pen was a knife, right? If I were to take this knife and I were to cut my hand, now I've got a cut on my hand, right? If I give some time for that cut on my hand to heal back, the skin will grow back, but it will also grow back tougher than what it was before when I cut it. That's called supercompensation. Your body is recovering to its normal point, and then it's extending past that so that it can supercompensate and try to prevent itself from experiencing that stress again. Okay, so that in itself is the basic concept of building muscle. We damage the muscle, aka cut our hand, and then we give it time to recover so that it can super compensate and grow. If we're in a period of our training where our volume, intensity, frequency, all of these stressors are increased, what we're effectively doing is we're cutting our hand and then cutting it again before it finally heals. What we need to do is we need to cut that hand, aka break down that muscle, and then we need to give it time for the skin, or in this case the muscle, to grow back. That is the process of super compensation. So by not taking deload phases, we're not allowing that super compensation to take place. So from a metaphorical standpoint, we're just basically cutting our hand over and over and over again without allowing the skin to grow back so that we can make progress in the gym. Another reason why we take a deload phase is to allow our body and joints to recover and also prevent injury. It's very common that as we continuously push loads up in our training exercise selection, our risk for injury increases, specifically within the connective tissue and our joints. So by taking some time off from the heavy loading, we can kind of allow our soft tissue or our connective tissue to kind of take a break from all the heavy beating that it's taking so that we can prevent injuries within training. So hopefully you're understanding the concept now that we need to be taking some steps backwards so that we can continue to make steps forward within our training. So now that you've got that concept down, let's talk about when we should deload. So traditionally in a powerlifting program, deloads are planned. Within a powerlifting program, you're generally going to have a time period where you're strategically overreaching, you're strategically doing more than what you can recover from, and then allowing a deload phase so that you can super compensate and reap the benefits from that overreaching period. I'm not very involved in the powerlifting community, but I am heavily involved in the bodybuilding community. So this video is going to be more tailored to bodybuilders. So bodybuilding, I like to use deloads as something that are auto-regulated, meaning that they're taken when they're needed and only when they're needed. Auto-regulated is more common in bodybuilding after assessing the biofeedback markers that your body will give you, telling you, hey man, we need to deload so that we can continue to make progress based off of your training performance and quite a few other things. It also allows training momentum to continue to roll by not having a planned deload. So if you guys have ever been in a groove with your training where you're finding week after week, session after session, you're getting stronger and or you're increasing reps, that is obvious momentum that we're having within our training. And I don't like to put in auto-regulated deloads, planned deloads that can disrupt that training momentum. There's nothing worse than having a good roll within your training where you're just killing it week after week after week after week, and then your coach says, okay, you need a deload, but you're thinking, I don't need a deload, I'm fucking killing it in the gym. So that's why I'm not a fan of I keep getting those two mixed up, of the planned deloads. I like the auto-regulated deloads, more specifically within a bodybuilding training cycle. So a general time frame for how often you're going to need to deload is anywhere between every 5 to 12 weeks. Now that is obviously something that's going to vary much so depending on the individual. For newer trainees, they're going to need to deload less often because their body's in a very, it's in an area where it doesn't really need to deload. They're able to make the newbie gains. But for more advanced trainees, that's where we have to start being more strategic with our training cycles and specifically planning more of the overreaching phases followed by deload phases so that we can super compensate. The closer we get to our genetic potential, the harder it is to put on lean muscle tissue. So we need to be smarter about our training and use deloads more strategically and effectively more often. So I just touched on how our body is going to give us some biofeedback markers so that we know as athletes that we need to have a deload. So how do you know that you need a deload? How can you read your body's biofeedback markers? What biofeedback markers is your body giving you that says, hey, we need to take a step back? One of the most common biofeedback markers that your body will give you that you need a deload phase is you are either going to have a decrease in your sleep quality, your sleep quantity, or both. Your body is going to be so stressed and your central nervous system is going to be so fried that it's very hard for your body to turn off and wind down and be able to get to sleep. So if you're finding that night after night after night after night, your sleep is disrupted, you may be doing too much in the gym and you may be exceeding your body's recovery capabilities. Another sign is that there may be a regression in our gym performance. Say we were benching 225 for 5 reps, and then the next week we were benching 225 for 6, and then the next week 225 for 7, and then all of a sudden the next week we started benching 225 for 5, and then after that 225 for 4, and then 3, and then the week after that 225 feels heavy as hell and you could probably only get 1 rep with it. That is a very good sign that your body is giving you that you need to take a step back. We never want to regress. Obviously, we want to keep continuously making progress. So if you start to see that week after week in multiple exercises, you're starting to regress, you may be strung out too thin. You may be exceeding your body's recovery capabilities. And so that's going to be another sign that you need to take a deload. Another very common sign is you're going to have a decrease in appetite. Again, your body's going to be so overworked that eating food is going to be very difficult for you. That's obviously very counterproductive when we're in a mass gaining phase where we're trying to eat a lot of food to promote weight gain. Having a loss in appetite is going to be very counterintuitive to reaching that goal. So that's going to be another sign that we need to take a deload. We could also see a sudden increase in body weight. This could happen because our body gets strung out so thin that our cortisol levels rise. Well, cortisol is our body's stress hormone. Once cortisol rises, our body is going to hold on to water weight. So we may see week to week, we may see a very sudden 3, 4, 5, 6 pound gain when nothing has really changed from a nutritional standpoint within our plan. That could be another sign that we need to take a deload. Our body's so stressed out that we're holding on to a lot of water. Another sign is that we're getting sick when we don't normally get sick. Sickness is going to be caused by our body's immune system. After we train, our immune system is compromised. And if our body can't recover from that training stimulus, our immune system is going to be compromised for an extended period of time, making us more susceptible to getting sick. This is something that happened to me. I actually overtrained myself into a case of mono. I just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and I literally got strung out so thin that I came down with mono. So lesson learned, we need to take deload phases before that happens, because obviously once you're sick, that is a long step back, and that's time away from the gym. Another biofeedback marker that we need to deload is that we have a sudden lack of motivation to train. We don't really want to go into the gym anymore and train because we're dreading how hard the workout's going to be. Obviously, that's going to be something that's mental, and in certain situations, we're going to have some discipline and push past that. But if we're getting a lack of motivation to train combined with some or multiple of the other biofeedback markers that I've listed, that may be our body telling us that we need to take a step back and let the recovery process happen. Another final biofeedback marker that we may be getting is that we're not recovering session to session. So we may be training back on Monday and then go to train back again on Friday, and by Friday our back is still sore. That's obviously going to lead to a poor back workout on Friday, which isn't really going to help propel us forward, because remember, a session is not a good session unless it's progress from the last one that promotes growth. So if we're being sore for multiple days and we can't recover from that, again, that may be another biofeedback marker that we need to take a step back so that we can take. So now that we know the signs to look for in our body to make sure that we know for sure that we need to take a deload, how do we actually go about implementing the deload? Now, there are multiple ways to do this. I'm going to try and cover as many as I can. The very first basic one is to take a complete week off of the gym. I am not a big fan of this unless that week just happens to be around a time that you're going to be going on a vacation or something. So to give an example, I've taken 2 deloads in the past year, or excuse me, in the past 2 years. Both times I've been going on vacation, and I don't really want to be bothered with training and taking time out of my day to train when I'm on vacation. So I had a period where I strategically overreached before the vacation so that I needed a deload that just happened to fall right in line with the week that I was on vacation. So again, you can take a full week off the gym. I am not a big fan of that unless it's around a vacation time. You can train for a week, but within that week, you can decrease your volume, you can decrease your load, the weight on the bar, you can increase the intensity in which you're lifting, and you can do a combination of all three of those things. We have some literature that shows that we can actually decrease our training volume by anywhere from 33 to 66% and still be able to maintain lean muscle tissue, as long as we keep the intensity very high. Now that's going to be more applicable in a contest prep situation, whereas the closer we get to our show date and the leaner we get and our body has less resources to train, we can start to decrease our training volume and keep our intensity high so that we can maintain maintain lean muscle tissue. That isn't really so applicable within a deload phase, because sometimes the intensity is the causing factor of the central nervous system stress. So I don't really like to implement deload phases where I cut your volume and you keep the intensity high, unless the person's volume is way too high. So say they're doing 25 sets of chest a week. I may say for your deload week, maybe you should just do 12 sets of chest per week, but keep the intensity high, but just drop the volume and see if that makes you feel any better. That's one way to go about that. But for a lot of people, I advocate more of a lower volume training approach. So a lot of the times it is the training intensity that causes the central nervous system fatigue. We can decrease the working set load. So going back to my previous example of we were benching 225 for 5, we can decrease that to 185 or 195. And then start to slowly work our way back up from there. That's going to take some stress off of our soft tissue. It's going to take some stress off of our central nervous system, and it's going to kind of allow that cut and that damage to heal back so that we can continue to hopefully progress past that 225 point in the future. We can also decrease the intensity of the training session. So instead of taking sets to failure, which is something that I advocate, we can start to leave sets with anywhere from 1 to 4 reps in reserve, where we're cutting the set off when we've got about 3 or 4 reps left in the tank, so that we're not stringing our body out too thin past its recovery capabilities. That's going to kind of be more of a pump type session, which is something that I don't normally advocate during the week. But in certain instances, we can kind of use the fluff or pump workouts within our deload phase, so that we're still getting some volume and work done, but it's not so stressful on our central nervous system and our soft tissues. Cliff Wilson, who is a professional bodybuilding coach who specializes with natural, drug-free athletes, he's talked about how he likes to implement deloads, usually taking anywhere from 3 to 5 days completely off of training and then resuming training where you left off. This is how I personally like to do deloads with myself. For me, the way that I train so intense and I train so hard that for me, if I go into the gym and I am not training hard and I'm not training intense and I'm purposely cutting sets off, leaving reps in the tank, and I'm purposely using lighter weights than I'm capable of, that really messes with me mentally, and I would rather just not train than go have a half-assed workout. So that's going to be something that obviously has its physical benefits, just taking 3 to 5 days completely off of the gym, but that's more so going to apply to your psyche, how you respond to training. Again, I'm somebody where I would just rather not train than have a really half-assed piss poor workout. So I really like this form of implementing a deload for myself personally. Again, this is why you have a coach, someone who can read your biofeedback markers, who knows your body, who knows your mentality, so that they can pick the best way to implement a deload for you. So now that we've talked about what a deload is, who needs a deload, how to implement a deload, and why do we deload, let's take a look at some final recommendations and considerations that I like to look at when I'm looking at a deload phase. I like to use a deload phase as an opportunity to completely wean the body off of stimulants and allow the body to resensitize itself to caffeine. So I really like to advocate that if you're taking a week of decreased training intensity, to completely get rid of all the stimulants in your body, to kind of allow your body to resensitize to stimulants. I've talked about this more in my supplement video, but caffeine is a tool. It is a very beneficial tool that has a lot of training benefits. But caffeine has a very weird catch-22 type of situation going on with it, that the more we use caffeine, the less effective it is. So I like to take the stance on caffeine that we should only be using it if it's really necessary. And a lot of people it's very easy to get into a routine where we're taking caffeine with every training session. And so in order to kind of re-stimulate or resensitize our body to caffeine, I like to take a week off of using caffeine, and a deload is a perfect opportunity to do that. It's really hard to tell people stop using caffeine when they're in the midst of a very intense training cycle, because they're using that caffeine to help get them through the training cycle. So a deload week where we're not training as hard, we don't really need caffeine, so we can kind of wean off of it and allow our body to resensitize it. So that's another tool that we can add to our toolbox as we enter the more aggressive training cycles in the future. Something that's very important to consider during your deload phase is how you're going to handle your nutrition. Are you going to stay in a calorie deficit if you're taking a deload in the middle of a cut? If you're in the middle of an off season or a gaining phase, are you going to stay in a surplus, or should you drop back to maintenance? And there's a lot of things to take into consideration here, so I'm not going to give any blanket statements. Again, this is why you work with a coach who knows you, who knows the entire context of the situation, who again knows you, your body, how you mentally react to everything. But a good thing to kind of recommend is, more often than not, we want to aim to stay isocaloric. So if you're taking a week off of training, you should try to maintain your body weight throughout that entire week. There are obviously going to be certain situations where being in a slight surplus during your deload week is going to be beneficial. There are obviously going to be other circumstances where being in a slight deficit during your deload phase is going to be beneficial. But more often than not, just kind of holding the position that you're at is going to help, and it's going to be a very beneficial way to look at your nutrition during a deload phase. I like to take a deload phase as a time to really work on the mental aspect of the sport. A lot of people talk about how in bodybuilding, the most important thing isn't really so much how you physically train and everything. It's how you can mentally stay strong and push through barriers and all that kind of stuff. So I like to take a deload week as an opportunity to kind of reflect mentally prepare for your next training cycle. Mentally and physically get yourself ready, because you're about to put yourself into a place that you've never been before, whether that's you've never done this much volume, you've never done this much weight, you've never trained this intense, or a combination of all of those things. And understand that the deload phase is a necessary phase to allow that to happen. If you want to go somewhere that you've never been before, you have to allow your body to recover so that it has the tools needed to push into the unknown. That's kind of like a creepy thing to say, like push into the unknown. It's like some shit out of a movie. But like when you're about to enter something and lift weights that you've never lifted before, you have to give your body the resources that it needs so that it can be able to handle that load and that stimulus. And a lot of times what your body really needs is rest. I also like to take the deload to kind of reflect on your past training cycles, which is why I very much recommend keeping a logbook of your training. I keep a physical notebook in my gym bag that has every workout, the weights, the reps, the date, everything. And so when I take a deload phase, I look back at the past. I look between the deloads, right? So I just came off of a deload last week. So when I was on that deload, I looked back at my training between the previous deload, which was like 12 weeks before that. So I looked at that 12 week of time and I look and say, here's where I started and here's where I finished in this 12 week of time. Did I make progress in these areas? If the answer is yes, then you're on the right track to making long-term progress. If the answer is no, and you kind of stayed the same throughout that 12-week period, then you need to reevaluate what you did in that 12-week period so that you don't make that same mistake in your next training cycle. Because that's how people spin their wheels, is by not making progress week to week, training cycle to training cycle. And so you need to constantly be reevaluating, did what I do, did it work? Did I make progress off of it? And if you didn't, you got to scrap it and you have to take a different approach, because that's the only way that you're going to continuously make long-term progress, is reevaluating, assessing, and then putting into action the changes that you made. Finally, I like to really take this as a time to understand mentally that rest is part of the plan. A deload is not something where it's a bump in the road. It is part of the plan. It needs to be in the plan. So I don't want you to think that taking a deload is setting you up for failure, or that you failed, you pushed too hard. It is absolutely part of the training plan. It's how we make long-term progress. Everyone at some point, and every sport, takes some time off so that they can allow their body and their mind to physically and mentally prepare itself to push forward in the future. Hopefully you guys liked the video. If you did, go ahead, drop a thumbs up. If you're interested in online coaching, my email link is in the description, as well as my Instagram. Thanks for watching, guys. Stay tuned for more.